I'd like to read this statement. Pursuant to the provisions of 2.68030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Arts Commission may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common writ of certiorari. I wrote it phonetically. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the Commission. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. And so now I am your chair today, Heather Lefkowitz, and I want to go ahead and call this meeting to order at 12:09. Before we do the roll call, Vivian, I wonder if Tessa, not to put you on the spot, but we did have a question I want to clarify because we do have new commissioners and we are trying to be intentional about letting all commissioners know about all committee meetings and encouraging them to come. However, I wanted to clarify about attendance and speaking and questions for commissioners who are not on a committee during a committee meeting. Would you be able to clarify that?
So if a commissioner is not assigned to a committee, they're more than welcome to attend a committee meeting. If the chair of that committee wants to recognize them because the chair believes that they have some type of input or subject matter expertise to that, the chair can do that. Or if a commissioner who is not assigned to a committee has input that they want to be heard on, separate and apart from the committee chair recognizing them, they can show up and basically be part of public comment. What I have advised against is for commissioners who are not part of a specific committee coming to the committee meetings and being active participants in the entire agenda or back and forth dialogue, because in my perspective, that violates the Open Meetings Act because it is not noticed as a commission meeting. So if a commissioner is not assigned to the committee, they cannot deliberate towards that committee's business because technically that would be commission deliberation.
That's very helpful. So just to clarify, if they're a subject matter expert, that would be an example of a time that a commissioner could recognize intentionally a commission member, or they can deliver public comment, but they're not kind of part of the conversation like as the committee members are.
Correct. So to give an example, for the work of this committee, if this committee had questions about CARE and CARE's operations and how CARE can become more integrated into the grants work, it would be appropriate for Commissioner Harden to come to the grants committee meeting and essentially give his input as he's a subject matter expert on CARE since he's the chair or co-chair of that committee. That's the best example, I think, for this committee, but that could apply to other ways. If for some reason a commissioner has had robust conversation with the public and you as the committee chair want to hear from that commissioner, that would be another situation where that would be appropriate.
Thank you very much for that. That's super helpful. And I'll write this up too as part of the minutes and make sure that everybody, the commissioners get that too through the minutes. Go ahead. Do you have something else?
Sorry, I apologize. I mean, also, if a commissioner has a specific interest in a committee that they're not assigned to, it would be more than appropriate for that commissioner to express that interest to the chair and the interim director, because the bylaws give fairly large leeway to the chair in committee assignments. And the bylaws also state at least 2 commissioners, but obviously on a committee like this, we have more than 2 commissioners. So
that's great. Thank you for that. Vivian, would you do the roll call?
I sure can.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lefkowitz.
Here.
Commissioner Jester.
Here.
Commissioner Knight.
here.
Commissioner Wade. Commissioner Khalil. We have 3 present and 2 absent, and we've met quorum.
Excellent. And we also have staff here today. Would you say who's here?
Yes, we have our interim executive director, Miss Ashley Batchelder, and we also have Miss Sydney Davis, our strategic grants and initiatives manager, and myself, Vivian Fox, the office support specialist.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to, we're going to offer a land acknowledgement now, which I'll read before we begin. Metro Arts stands and holds space on the unceded and sovereign lands of the Cherokee East, Yuchi, and Shawnee peoples who have stewarded it for generations. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in the hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We acknowledge we are all standing on ancestral lands, and we honor the thousands of enslaved African peoples whose lives were physically and spiritually stolen. We pay respect to elders, past and present. Metro Arts invites you to join in our commitment to knowing our Native communities in more meaningful ways in alignment with our restorative arts practice. So, thank you. I want to welcome committee members and staff, and we don't have any attendees, but I hope that people are watching. I just want to say before public comment that we are there are materials on the public notice page. When we post the agenda, we're also trying to be intentional about posting materials there for people to find, just to have transparency so that people at home or anyone can look at the materials that we are looking at as well. So I just wanted to let you know that. I'll just move to public comment. Vivian, do we have any public comment today?
We do not have any public comment, and we did not have any public comment submitted through email.
Great. So just a reminder to the public that we do have public comment before every commission and committee meeting, and people can also submit public comment via the website, right, the page before that, and we get those. So we hope that the public will
just so they know that
yeah.
That's on the nashville.gov website.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go to boards and commissions and they select art commission and then board meetings, it'll show up for all of the board meetings. It'll let you know for any upcoming meetings or past meetings. Mm-hmm. And if they're able to see this, I'm not sure if this is being broadcasted, but the materials are there as well. You can always find the materials now on that nashville.gov website. It's always available now.
Great. Thank you, Vivian, for doing that. I think that's what we want. Okay, I'm going to move now to approval of minutes. So you have committee members received the minutes from the January 15th meeting. Upon review of those, minutes are always works in progress until they are approved. So I welcome any corrections, thoughts, conversation around those minutes. If there is none, I would call for a motion to approve the minutes.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from the January 15th meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, thank you. So the minutes are approved. Did you second? Yeah. Great. Thank you. We're going to move into our discussion items. This meeting is, we don't have any action items. We're not voting on anything today. This is an informational meeting. As I did say in our last meeting, it's my hope that we will be meeting more frequently as a committee, and that things will emerge today related to timeline that will help us plan for next year. So Ashley and I are going to talk about the March schedule, but we're going to try to be on an every 2 week schedule for a while, which at least till we get these kind of timelines settled. I wanted to begin with the grants update for fiscal year 25. And again, as Vivian said, that timeline is on the public meeting page, so that the public can see that as well. So Ashley, would you give us an update, a current status update on the timeline, and then we'll have some time for questions.
Yes, happy to. So what you all have as a handout, and again, as posted on the public meeting notice page for anyone watching from home or on the screen, is a table that updates you on the activities that have been undertaken by staff and others since our last meeting. So this table was completed by just adding a new column to the timeline that you all authorized on January the 17th. And so I can do a run through of what you have printed in front of you. Sydney is welcome to jump in if I'm missing something, and this is conversational, so, ask questions as we go. Don't feel like you need to hold questions until the end. So I'll just go through it. So sort of the first line here is about the application period that everyone knows submittable is reopen, and I don't want to call it reapplications because it's updates to the applications. So this is for both Thrive and general operating applications. And so these activities are really around the engagement, communication, information sharing that has been done around that. So we began daily office hours beginning on January 30th with a sign up to that link posted on the website, as well as communicated through staff of how to sign up for those office hours. The office hours have included people asking questions around like reporting for FY24 grants, for questions about the cycle right now, as well as people asking questions about the next cycle. So we're fielding a lot of different questions, not only about this right now, but kind of broader questions about Metro Arts. So as of yesterday, I penciled in, if you're looking at the one on the screen, it's 2 blank lines, but for everyone on paper, I penciled in that as of the end of the day yesterday, our count was that we've done 53 scheduled one-on-one grant clinics. So those were scheduled ones that were on the calendar, primarily by Sydney, secondarily by me, and that is an undercount of the communications that we've had. We're fielding messages that are sent through the submittable platform, as well as messages sent to the arts grants email, as well as messages that other staff members are getting based on just relationships and who people know within the agency that they're going to. So that 53 number is just the scheduled grant clinics. When I say grant clinics, I'm just meaning like a scheduled time with a specific person that they've signed up for. Daily. And so the next update here is around the fiscal agent recruitment. We had been having conversations with potential fiscal agents throughout January, and on February 4th, sent a more robust communication to our listserv, just inviting organizations to partner with Metro Arts in this way, if they are able to, if they have the organizational capacity to. I know that several commissioners have helped have conversations and disseminate that information as well. And so the resource guide that we have updated on our website right now has 18 organizations who said that they are open to being contacted by Thrive applicants to have a conversation about fiscal sponsorship. We also know that there are some organizations who have already made arrangements to be fiscal sponsors and, have let us know that they don't need to be listed on the resource guide because they're at their capacity with sponsoring 3 artists, for example. So the resource guide is what we're directing applicants to, and as of today has 18 organizations on it.
And just to clarify, to be a fiscal agent, you do not need to be on the directory. This was just a tool that we created for individuals who needed to just a starting place for finding a fiscal agent if fiscal agency is completely new to them. But it is not a requirement to be a fiscal agent. So that 18 is a very small portion of the people who have already either reached out to us and like Ashley said, have already done their paperwork to be listed in someone's submittable account as a fiscal agent. So those are just the ones who wanted to be publicly recognized. And then also we did have conversations with everyone, but the general consensus is that they wanted to leave their admin fee off. I know that was a question. And why that's not listed on the directory, because they knew that they were going to have individual conversations with each artist. So it's not a lack of oversight. It's just something that if it's listed on there, it was requested by the fiscal agent on the directory for it to be listed on there.
Even though they're not on the official list, I assume this is happening, but we're keeping a list of all of the people that are acting as fiscal agents. Are we or are we not? Okay. Yeah, cool.
It'll be part of the application. So, if an organization is serving as a fiscal agent, we'll need their letter of determination from the IRS documenting their nonprofit status and the documentation that they're agreeing to do so. So that's part of all the required information in the update to that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about for ability of reaching out in future years.
Yep, absolutely. On February the 7th, which was last Friday, we hosted a virtual info session around this requirement, fiscal agency. We had about 14 people attend that, and so had good questions, good discussions. And also in this, in the original timeline, there was mention around preliminary technical reviews, and so there are 3 staff who have been assigned to help with technical reviews. The next thing on the timeline is just about legislation being filed by the January 6th deadline, which was completed. That deadline was met. That was what allowed us to go to council on January 21st. We've talked about this before. It's the subject of previous meetings. When we go to the next page, the MHRC commission meeting is listed on there. Again, we've talked about that, and that meeting has already happened. A recap of the January 15th meeting, grants committee meeting. We just reviewed the minutes for that, so I'm not going to go into that. The next couple deadlines, again, or things on the timeline are just meetings of this body, so we know that those happened. And January 17th, the updated legislation or the policies to inform the legislation were submitted on time. And then we went to Metro Council on January 21st and had pretty good support by the council. Most of the questions were around just getting clarity around the fiscal sponsorship requirement, questions about some of the planning that had gone into that, questions around the grant contract period, And overall, I think the council was happy to see decisions moving forward. And so our policy was authorized on that January 21st meeting. Submittable reopened on January 24th. The next thing that I inserted here is around panelist evaluation and the selection process. So these are our community members who serve on the grant review panels. The deadline for those panel applications was January the 22nd, and we had 75 community members submit applications by that deadline. There were 4 staff who volunteered to review those applications, which is customary how that is done. And all the applications were scored, and Sydney and I then assessed the results on that and came down to assembling 3 panels. There's going to be 2 panels for Thrive and 1 panel for operating. That's just based on the number of applications in each category. Those final panelists will be notified today. We just finalized that list at the end of last night. And so that process is moving forward. Those panels are scheduled for, you'll see on the timeline, February 25th and 26th. And then if we get to the last page here, we did have to go back to council on February the 4th to extend the contract period. The original guidelines had the grant period ending on June 1st, but there was no reason why we couldn't extend that to June 30th, and so that's just in the best interest of the applicants to give them the full month of June to do their work and have that longer period. We did talk to everybody possible about the ability to extend beyond the fiscal year, and just there was not a way to do that. We had council members I asked council members to ask on my behalf. I asked on my own behalf, and we just did not find any way that we could extend a grant period that is funded by the fiscal year that just needs to maintain in the same fiscal year. Happy to take questions on that if anyone has questions. And so that kind of brings us on the timeline here to, like I said a moment ago, the panelist orientation training, the independent scoring that they'll do, and then come back together on February 25th and 26th. And I believe we have the next grants committee meeting scheduled. Is that confirmed for the 28th? And so at that meeting, what we expect to be able to bring to you is our list of applicants that receive the qualifying scores for their applications to be funded based on the funding formulas that you all passed and authorized in previous meetings. And so the focus of that February 28th meeting will be for you to make those recommendations for funding to the full commission to happen a few days afterward. So overall, we're a couple days behind on the sort of accelerated timeline that was authorized, but we are moving along as well as we can.
I would just like to say thank you for this timeline, and that these kinds of detailed updates in writing is exactly kind of what we want, and we want to provide to the public and for us, and it's so helpful, and it provides a template for us too, which will make planning next time so easy. So as a tool for educating us and the public about the process and just transparency, thank you for this, and I like it. Are there other questions about this timeline specifically from the committee? Again, we don't have anything to vote on with this. This was approved by the commission. And I mean, my thought is that we will propose and that the commission will approve a timeline for 26 as well, that this will be the practice.
Are you guys throwing a pizza party on February 19? Is one day going to be enough time for all the technical reviews? I'm not sure there's much we can do about it, but that's just the one thing that popped out. It seems like a lot of work on one day.
It is. It is. But, you know, we want to move as quickly as possible with integrity in the process, and, you know, are doing the planning work right now to make that possible to happen on the 19th.
Is that something that has to be done by staff, or can commissioners come in and help with that? Or is that, again, would that be a conflict of some sort?
I believe that it's very contingent on doing reviews within submittable, which we wouldn't have access to.
Yeah, the technical review is like eligibility, so it's ensuring, for example, are the letters of determination from the IRS submitted for the for nonprofits, are the required documents, and it looks like Tessa wants to say something, but that is a staff duty.
And also, before you say something, I'll say too that was the point in asking that these kind of preliminary technical reviews happen before, such that it would make that process easier. And so that should be the case, right?
Yeah.
Tessa?
I mean, Ashley hit the nail on the head. That's really more staff work, and anything that prevents a potential conflict of interest on the back end, because you guys are the ultimate approval authority for these grantees.
Fair. I was just thinking about beefing up HR for you for the day, but that all makes sense.
I do appreciate the ways the offers of help.
And I will say, I mean, staff has been working really round the clock. We know this was an accelerated timeline, but because of the delays, and this is how it we want it to happen. So I know it's challenging, but they have our appreciation for sure. And also that's important because I do think one kind of maybe advantage of having the two things bump up is that the memory will be quite fresh, in terms of the things we want to look at. And I know we'll get into 26, but we're right next to each other, right, in terms of the 2 fiscal years. And so the lessons that we have learned and kind of things that will be motivating, I think, to us as we think about policy for 26. Other questions or thoughts about this timeline? We have no action to take on this. It's just for our information, right? And again, I'd like to hold it up as a template with my thanks. I love a good table, y'all. I just do. It makes my heart happy. If it's okay to move to 26 and start that discussion, we are moving to 26. If you notice, and just to be clear, because I know that we're all new. I mean, all of us, right? In terms of our level of institutional knowledge. But we are, already, quote unquote, behind in terms of thinking about that. But our goal is to really create a comprehensive timeline for 26 by March, right? So when we close 25 and get that underway, that we are immediately jumping into this, and that we have a template or a guide that we can use to set goals, and that we can use to share with the public and be transparent about what we're doing. So, Ashley, do you want to talk about the thoughts in terms of the template that you provided?
Yeah, so on to the next handout in your packet, and again, on the slides and on the public meeting notice page, you have the same thing that we have on the table here in front of us. And so the goal was here to just kind of have discussion, thinking about the cycle we just went through, thinking about the steps to go through for 26. All this is a roughly linear list of the general types of things that need to happen, starting chronologically where we are, like the commissioner just said, in March. And so I put some just sort of guiding questions at the top. I'll just read them out loud for folks watching as well. So when we're thinking about timeline, we're thinking about planning. What policy questions were tabled or left unclear from the current cycle? How can we prioritize community engagement throughout the entire cycle as we start this again for 26? Where are the opportunities or the needs to improve details in the Thrive or operating guidelines? And just generally, how can we improve our processes from start to finish throughout all of this? And so really just reading what's on the page here, but I think March is really devoted to community engagement. This is also the time when contracting will be happening for FY25, so there will still be like that administrative part of the work happening, but we should have a really, thorough community engagement plan that we begin in March around these things. That would continue into April. We could potentially be looking at finalizing guidelines in the month of April as well, thinking about the approval process and how rushed a lot of that was this year, so that, we know that we have to send legal, finance, this committee, the full commission, and council approval process for the guidelines. If we're looking at that, let's say, early May, we're continuing to do community engagement throughout this time so that when applications open in May, maybe mid-May, late May, remain open for a month, doing a lot of community engagement through that open application period time, using the month of July for panel evaluation process and scoring. We know that we're asking our community panelists to turn around a lot of work on the timeline that we're asking them to work with us right now on the very short process, so making sure that we have much more time baked into the schedule of that, looking at July. And then that would put us into August, thinking about this committee and commission approvals for what those allocations look like. That would put contracting in September and funds in October. So this is a similar timeline, or it's a similar end timeline of like an October fund dispersal as it was 2 years ago. And so just thinking, working forward, but also working backward from that. And then just wanted to kind of have some discussion. We can use these questions at the top. Again, policy questions that we tabled throughout discussion. Our expectations for community engagement, how we, get back in the community after the rough year that everyone has kind of gone through with grants, and how we're more communicative and transparent throughout that process. And so
I think we are starting a list, right, of these policy questions that were tabled or left unclear. If you'll remember from that vote, we pulled that discussion of pulled the policy around underrepresented council groups, because we were trying to make policy, like sitting here as a commission, there were too many unknowns. But the commission indicated that is something that they want to consider. So that would be up to our committee to think about how that might happen. And then what was the other one? Oh, yes. Let's. The other one is background checks as a policy. And can we just take this opportunity to, Ashley, could you provide an update on the background check policy and what's happened since our last meeting? But again, with the understanding that we want to review this and do better next fiscal year.
Yeah, I'm realizing when I was going through our timeline of what we've been working on, I could have included, I omitted including an emergency executive committee meeting that we had on Tuesday of this week. And so I want to, for the record, also update everybody on what happened in that meeting. So, and this is also, a point of frustration that has been communicated to us by lots of applicants around the lack of sort of clarity around the background check requirements, guidelines, expectations. And so after we implemented this requirement, there wasn't clear guidance on what exactly are applicants being asked to upload. Is it confirmation that a background check has been done? Is it something more detailed? Is it, if you've got 100 people at your organization, do you need to upload 100 documents? Are there consent forms for that? Does Metro Arts have the proper protocols in place to be storing that information? And we realized that we didn't have a sort of robust plan to operationalize that. So what we came up with and what the executive committee authorized through an emergency meeting status, because we realized that the guidelines as written kind of made it impossible for applicants to meet that requirement and could potentially mean that they would be invalidated during the technical review and have a very detrimental effect to potentially a large amount of our grantees. So we called an emergency meeting for the executive committee to address this policy gap. And so the result of that is that we have developed an attestation form for Thrive grantees and for operating grantees, which is, I will read it into the record here, and this is available on the Metro Arts Partner Tools website as well. So it is acknowledging and attesting that all adult individuals participating in the programming or instruction of minors, defined as persons under 18 years old, at our organization or with the Thrive Project as proposed, have satisfactory background checks within the last 2 years, and that this includes lead artists, contract, and organizational staff or contract artists. And we define satisfactory using language from the Metro Code as it exists for other requirements in Metro. And so organizations are able to, or are now requested to, upload this attestation so that it is standardized as well, so that when staff are doing technical reviews, we know exactly what we're looking at or looking for, and it's either yes or no, it's there, versus sort of discerning what was uploaded and if that meets the technical review requirements. And so this attestation is provided in lieu of providing a copy of the background investigation reports in the grant application. The full form is available again on the website. I didn't read everything on it, but that's the high point. So all of that to say, we've still gotten more recommendations from grantees and from some of you as committee members as well to mirror this policy perhaps on what MNPS uses. And we've begun to do some of those contacts with other departments just so that we could see what their policies are.
And just to be clear, if an organization if they had submitted background checks prior to the email that they received with the attestation, they are still required to submit the attestation. So everyone is required to submit the I just like saying the word attestation. Is that correct? Yes. Mm-hmm. That is an example of a policy decision, as Ashley said, that we want to talk about as a committee and do some research on, again, what best practices. But we hope this provides some clarity for our grantees, and we will, part of the community engagement, right, we'll be hearing feedback on these kinds of things so that we can incorporate that. And was there any other policy decision? It was those two things, I think, that we had outlined. I know there are other things, but
I mean, just generally thinking about fiscal sponsorship in the next cycle, that process. I think that we could, update you on some of the more robust kind of updates about conversations that had happened in the working group, how we landed there. I know that there's still a lot of questions around that, and we could talk about some of that now, or we could talk about that within the context of the rest of this. But, we know that there's going to be ways to improve that process. So that would certainly be part of this.
I really think that whatever community engagement looks like in March, that these are the kinds of things that we want feedback on, or want to provide mechanisms, right, in community engagement to have conversations about these things. And that's my hope, that it would happen in multiple ways. So I just want to say that and see if anyone has any other thoughts about how that might happen or about the timeline as well. My thought is that we will take this and that we can share it broadly with community members, with the rest of the commission, with other people to try and get some feedback on it and what it might look like. With the understanding that some of the dates, like we told council we'd be back soon, so we want to be back soon, right, for them, so that there's both a little bit of flexibility, but also that we are creating something that's reasonable and doable. So I'll let you all discuss, ask questions.
I don't have any questions. I just appreciate having some guidelines to get us started on this journey. And I think it's particularly useful, not just for us, but for the public as well. We've had so many questions over the last several months about when things were going to happen. This at least gives us some specific things to shoot for. So I appreciate that.
And I think for maybe this committee meeting in March, we can have a more flesh out thing. What do we mean by community engagement, right? So we can provide greater detail for this.
It's my thought that when we talk about community engagement too, this kind of goes to like our thoughts when we created the other thing too, but because I do think that's a word that has just been used, and especially it's a word that's been used a lot. And I think it would be great for us to have a conversation about how that looked and to receive feedback about what that means, like multiple, I just wrote down, I'm like multiple modes, like multiple ways to engage the community, thinking about communications that go out and then also come in, public events, virtual, like what does it look like, I guess. So I'd welcome any just discussion about that now, just to help me start thinking. But yeah,
I would say, first of all, I feel like community engagement moving forward with someone at the helm of our organization who knows what it's like to not be communicated with well is probably going to bode well for us. So you know what kind of public communication you wanted, and you can help us give that. Second, the two things that I felt were lacking most from our communication before were just enough lead-up time for people to be well prepared. And then I think there's nothing wrong with the presentation style, but also I think they need to be an opportunity for people where they're encouraged to and know ahead of time that they can ask any questions that they have. I don't think there were a lot. There were some comments on the presentation, but I don't think there were as many questions as could have been asked from confused parties. So if they had enough lead-up time to prepare well, and then they were encouraged to be very questioning and to ask all the questions they had, I feel like those would be more productive sessions.
And to respond to the questions that we might propose, the questions that we have here about how things should look going forward. If instead of, we can present what things have been, but then we can ask our questions about what people are seeking moving forward, and we can sort of assess that as part of our next step decisions.
That's a good point, too, for both of you. Like, both of the things you said made me think about, well, particularly what you said about lead time, given how crunched we are as a staff and how hard everybody's going to be working, up until, and so thinking about these events and guidelines and when they do happen and how we can do that and give as much lead time as possible, right? So I think that's a good point, because if we're looking at coming up with something or finalizing something in March, and that's when we want these conversations to be happening, because we're going to have I don't know. I think that's something good to keep in mind.
Let's throw the dates on the calendar this week or next week for March. I mean, I'm not telling you how to do that, but like that's a good amount of lead up time. The other thing that I was thinking is, and you're already doing this, but having things to hold in our hands and having presentations up on the screen I know that's been some criticism that we've received, and would be another aspect that wasn't quite the same as the public engagement we did before.
Yeah, sounds great. I agree with all of y'all. Yeah, I think multiple strategies, right? It could be, I know that one thing I want to start doing is like advertising weekly, community office hours that I have in different parts of Nashville that we have on our social media, right? As the new director, to hear from people, scheduling visits with grantees that we've had, how did y'all make it through the last year with uncertainty? Like, help us reconnect with as many people as we can, having planned community engagement events where, small discussions, as well as the sort of didactic information sharing, as well as, just group discussions, having videos recorded about moving through the applications. Hopefully we'll have our public information officer in a few months. Maybe that's optimistic. And so, all of that takes staff capacity. And I realize that as I'm rattling off ideas and saying, we'll do everything you're asking us to do. But I know that, everybody wants to help to make 26 work better than 25 did. And so I know that is my commitment as your new interim ED, and look forward to providing you more details at our next meeting.
I think, too, in terms of staff capacity, what you said, because, again, you're all just working up to if there are ways that we can advocate for you, like more broadly to get the help, like I'm thinking about comms or things. I know that there's been discussions about that, but if there's any way that we can help advocate for whatever. I'm also wondering if it is the role. I mean, I'm new at this, so somebody tell me. But in terms of like the role, so thinking about, for example, the policies, underrepresented, background checks. Is that something that we could help, or background checks, how they work in other places? Is that something that our committee could research and do that? I mean, I know we don't want to, but just in order to help, what is that? What happens usually there?
I mean, ideally, I've talked about this before. The commission is setting the work to be done, and staff members or various Metro departments are assisting staff in doing that work. So, we talked about it at the executive committee meeting regarding what somebody like the NASA program does, and so, whether that's Ashley directing her staff or me doing that research, that's a directive that's that Metro employees should be doing. Nothing prohibits you from, doing that, but really we don't want to get back to muddying the waters on commissioners doing work of staff. I'm not going to go down that thought process, but I think that Metro employees are very competent and capable, and even if it means going to employees of other departments to be thought partners, that's the work that needs to get done. Now, I'm gonna say this because I've said it before. It needs to be said. When the work needs to get done, the overall policy has to be clear. And that's one thing that I'll ask from this body and the full commission, is that we have to be clear on what the policy is, so the work underlying the policy is done appropriately. So, for example, the underrepresented council districts, the policy on that, the intent was great, but what did that policy really mean? Was it underrepresented council districts for Thrive dollars? Was it underrepresented council districts for all of Metro dollars? What's the intent of that policy? So the more clear the policy is, the easier the work for staff is. And I will just say this, your interim director's entire body of work has been on community engagement and community outreach, so I feel like leaning on her for that guidance is the right thing to do in this space.
I think that's great. That's very helpful clarification too. I feel like one role maybe we could have is maybe to kind of generate questions or about these things, or questions / suggestions, like even what we were doing in executive committee about like brainstorming and MNPS, or thinking about underrepresented, or like as you said, Tessa, kind of what is underneath that policy, what is underneath that, and then that could help give guidance or clarity to staff in terms of how that happens.
Can I ask a question about that? I'm sure that this question has been discussed, but I haven't heard the answer. So obviously we don't want to grant or give money to anybody who is going to be who would not pass a background check, but where does that liability fall? So is that on the commission, or would that be, now that there's a fiscal agent in place for Thrive and some of that liability is on the fiscal agent, would it be the fiscal agent's liability? Like, is it even necessary that we have a background check as part of our policy?
I think it's best policy to have a policy on it, as MNPS does, the NASA program does. The liability lies in the text of the contract, right? So Ashley and I have discussed that these attestations become exhibits to the contract, and I add language into the contract regarding that attestation. So the liability is if someone lies on attestation, which is incorporated in the contract, that contract could become void. Metro contracts also include indemnification clauses. So if Metro were to be held liable or to incur a lawsuit based on some action underlying that contract, that entity has to indemnify Metro for that liability, or should indemnify Metro. So yeah, that's the answer.
We need to have it because it's a best practice.
It's the policy of the commission, right? I'm
Sure,
not going to say one way or the other, but the commission via staff recommendation, has said this is a lacking policy, and so it's been the commission's will to make a policy around that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a good best practice to me. I just wondered where the liability fell. So, thank you.
And as we look at the policy next year, we can lean into what was confusing right about this year and the challenges and hear from the public about that and make a better policy. Have any other thoughts about community engagement? Do you have any more thoughts about anything?
Yeah, and this is me as your lawyer watching certain processes go really bad over the past several years. I think when you're looking at community engagements, you need to be clear on what you want engaged, right? I think the most recent community engagement was presented as, here's what it is, give us your feedback, but this is what it is. And that didn't go over well. And so what Director Singh did was there was broad community engagement on all thought processes across the entire spectrum of the process. And that was then narrowed down into specific policy decisions for the commission. And then there was feedback on those specific policy viewpoints, if you will. And so it's not my role as a lawyer, but I've had to be involved as a lawyer because there's been so many questions about processes and what was required under the conciliation agreement. So that would be my advice to you all as you're looking at community engagement, is making sure you know what you're asking the community to engage on.
Yeah, I think, I don't have a specific plan to present to you today beyond this, but I think given that we are, behind for next year as well, it's like starting with what we have, engaging around how the requirements work for people, what worked, what didn't work, what was burdensome, what did people not understand. That will help us see where we need to make improvements. To a specific example around like the Thrive, right? The amount of grants, right? Like asking questions of, we know that applications open and $20,000 in a limited budget that can't fully fund everyone. Would the community of 5 applicants look to see grants at larger, right? Because I know that I hear a lot about how Thrive artists collaborate with each other, and I want to be able to like recommendations that understand how that happens. Thinking about how applications are made, what those ask amounts are, and so what are those specific questions that will give us feedback to think about what our recommendations are that we bring to you, as well as just the information sharing, right? And I know that the operating model as it is, we've heard some feedback about it, and so starting with those things, right? Asking more questions about it, confusing there has been some confusion around how to understand where folks fall in the operating model. Lots of percentages involved. So, a clarifying thing that I want to say about that is it's set up of, small organizations are funded at 50% of your budget, but when we do the overall scale for that, applicants we're estimating to be about 32% of that. So when we think about are describing these funding models as well. So yeah, I see community engagement as making sure we have shared understanding, as well as asking questions that generates feedback that we can act on the timeline that we are on, through those multiple methods, multiple strategies.
Knowing a plan and holding when it's I have more, as for me anyway, I have more confidence in your understanding of what needs to be than I have the entire time I've been at Metro.
Can I ask advice about thoughts about this timeline? We talked about like getting feedback on it or something, and how that could happen. Like, could we ask, would they send it to you, Tessa? Or who do they send it to? You know what I'm saying? Like, what would be a good process for us in terms of, this is public, right? And we want to share it with the commission too, just to get any thoughts before we convene again to get more granular with it.
Tessa, would we include Chuck on that conversation because he's the community engagement manager? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I'll defer to the director on that as far as this is an actual policy document. But it is really covers more information from the committee, which is not adopted by the last timeline. We just basically it looks like it very complicated. A lot of ways to build into it. Right. I would weigh legal finance. Talk legal or legal timeline. It's got to be the final formal document, right? Like, we get going back into this with it. It's, not finalized. In fact, the commission has not had a review. So keeping steps in mind, hold it in most important. So if we're to go to legal, we can engage in these people, right? I'm going to take this real quick because it's on here and I might be going down a rabbit hole you asked for, but the per code, the council guidelines, the document, and so it's really important that we understand what the criteria is. It is my understanding that criteria is measurable, mandatory things for each application to have done with a set score associated with things. And the guidelines are, the format of the application, what we're looking for, the robustness, whatever. And so if we could make that distinction going forward, it will speed up this process. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that is a great point, and I've learned so much about that in those final days, like thinking about that distinction. That would just be a helpful point, right, for us to all know, like an education point. So that's good. I mean, I think my understanding too, Ashley, is that obviously we'll go back and get more detail in these in terms of like when it would need to go legal for review to get, what we did before. But just in terms of a general thing, like, would this work? I think one thing, like, Ashley and I were talking about, like, thinking about the applications opening in late May. Like, that's something I would like to hear from artists and organizations about in terms of that. I mean, is that okay? I mean, it's summer. I mean, I don't know. It's a different timeline than before. So those are the kinds of things that I would like feedback on. I guess what I was thinking too is like, if people have feedback, where does it go? Like, should they send it to, if people have thoughts about this, what should they do?
I know when we had the community engagement at East Nashville, I know that Claudia, Chuck, like they had it where they could scan a code and then like that feedback came back to the team. So I know that it's possible, like there's a way for that to happen, for the feedback, whether we put that online on Instagram or where we put like a code or something on nashville.gov. Like there's a way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's all things that we'll plan as staff, ways to do that. Ways to start talking about this while also, focused on the next 2 weeks of the current cycle that we're in.
Well, that's what I kind of was wanting to not flood you all, because you all are focused on this year and that's where it should be. So wanting to protect your getting through this, but then just kind of trying to create a process so that if people do have thoughts.
Yeah, don't. It's more just to have a conversation.
Yeah. I think, Commissioner Lefkowitz, to your point, and getting back to the role of the committee and commission, if this committee views community feedback as an ongoing iterative process, then your policy to the staff would basically be setting dates on, this iteration of community feedback will be done by this date, and here's what the commission expects to see from that. And so you are giving the policy, and here's when you expect to see the output from that policy decision, which I think will help, guide your director to guide the staff. As of right now, it's just we all get in a room and say, what was the community engagement, and there's not a set policy from the commission on what that output should look like.
Thanks to everyone for this, and it's very helpful. And I would just, we'll just keep working on this, but if you could just take this and start thinking about these things and the questions, and this has been helpful to me in terms of thinking about an agenda for next time when we talk about it. So,
And I'll just take a point of privilege to say that if any commissioners are watching as well, like I'm, really interested in connecting one-on-one as new interim ED as well. Having really direct communication, conversations, making sure that I understand your expectations of me if we're talking about community engagement or anything that is under my scope and responsibilities. And so one way to give me feedback is to just have a cup of coffee with me. We can talk about it. In addition to, of course, more public dissemination of this as well, but for commissioners specifically, I want to be very, very available for anything.
Thank you.
okay, if it's all right with everyone, I'll move on to new old business. I want to open the floor for any additional business, discussion of any unresolved or new matters. I feel like we've just been talking about a lot of stuff. But yes, are there any things that are hanging out there for anyone? Anything?
Do we have action items for next time? For example, should we be sending suggestions for how we have ideas for community engagement or what we expect? Should we be creating that and sending it to Ashley now, or is that for discussion at a future meeting, or where are we in that process?
That's a great point. So I think that, and you just tell me what you think, maybe coming ready to the next, is it the next meeting? No, March.
The next meeting, scheduled for February the 28th, we expect major action items. We should have Thrive and operating grantees, name, score, grant amount that we are bringing to you to make recommendations for funding to the full commission. That will be the main priority of that meeting. We can have an update on this as well. I'm just thinking about the time of the meeting. Yeah. But yeah, happy to. Yeah, you can send me things anytime you want.
Okay, because obviously if the next meeting is February 28th and we're starting community engagement in March, we want to have had more thoughts that are firmly on the table then. So we'll just email you some thoughts as they occur to us.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I can, actually, I would suggest sending them not only to Ashley, but you could also send them to me and to Chuck Beard, because he is the community engagement manager.
I'm just. You can send them. You can always copy Vivian on it, but I want to help just for confusion that's been in the past around commissioner staff. I want to try to just help improve our communication channels and processes as well. Especially, he's not in this conversation right now, and to start with. So I'll sort of manage that through me, and disseminate work on the team as it needs to be to accomplish the goals.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then Ashley and I and Vivian, we'll huddle again on the dates for March, because, we did mention that we're going to meet more frequently. And so we'll get on that, which should provide some clarity for what happens next. And also balance that with what you said about dates for things. But we just want to protect, I'm feeling protective of their time and focus, while also knowing we need to hold these two things at once. So this has been very helpful for me to think through. Any other new or old business?
I would just say, as you're developing the next agenda, keep in mind you can agenda something, and if time doesn't allow for it, defer it, versus under agendaing it and not being able to discuss or address an issue due to notice requirements.
So better to over than under. Great. That's very helpful. Thank you. Other thoughts? I mean, this has been very helpful, and I also think, community, this is just a thought. I'm going to take a point, but I think obviously what we do in terms of community engagement is meant to improve the policy and what we are producing for people. But I also think it is the opportunity just to build community generally, like between humans. And so I like that, right, as well. I think that's what we need and what we want, and it will be valuable for all of us. So I'm excited about that. I am excited to say that it's 1:23, and that I am excited to say that if there is no new or old business, I would be happy to take a motion to adjourn with my thanks to Ashley and Sydney and Vivian and everyone for all their work and for being here. But that, you don't have to put that into a motion, but
I agree with that, and I make a motion to adjourn.
I don't know if it needs a second, but here it is. Second. Yeah. Motion to adjourn with thanks.
wait, we didn't vote on it. It says so. It says so on my thing. Okay, never mind. It's all good. Okay.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.